And welcome to The Bottom Line, where we break down some of the bigger and main business and economic stories of the day. This week, European leaders are confronting the realities of energy issues. Tuesday saw Luxembourg welcome EU's energy ministers, and today we see the first EU-Gulf Cooperation Council summit discuss key geopolitical issues, including renewable energy. I am joined now by Dr. Sławomir Raszewski, senior lecturer from the University of East London, to look at the current situation of European energy security and supply. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us on The Bottom Line.
Thank you for having me.
So EU energy ministers met in Luxembourg on Tuesday to discuss energy in the context of obviously the third winter looming since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and obviously Russian energy constantly being delivered to Europe. And to be absolutely blunt, it seems that this is something that we keep discussing all the time. And I wanted to ask you what your opinion on that summit actually was, because it feels that in reality, very little progress is actually being made. Or am I perhaps being a little bit pessimistic?
Yes, I think you're right. This is the first summit of this kind, and unfortunately, we should not expect too much from this summit, largely because of the situation in which European Union is at the moment. We have swapped one dependence for another dependence. In fact, the Russian gas supplies, with which discontinued abruptly, we still rely, as you say, for only a small fraction of the deliveries from Russia via Ukraine. But this is likely to be discontinued or reduced next year. We have swapped this dependence on liquefied natural gas imported from the Middle East. So this is a catch-22 situation.
The EU Energy Commissioner spoke at the meeting, and he mentioned that there has to be a lot of simplification when it comes to grid projects, mobilizing funding, and also more integrated planning. And I was wondering whether you could perhaps break this down for us and tell us what that actually means, because really another aspect of Russian oil being brought into Europe actually is perhaps scrutinizing the role of Turkey, because as we understand that, Turkey plays a crucial role in Russian oil being brought into Europe.
So when it comes to natural gas and oil, we have to kind of distinguish the two. Oil is largely internationally traded commodity. When it comes to natural gas, we have two options: either pipeline gas or liquefied natural gas. Our options for natural gas delivered by pipeline has been diminished. We can no longer rely on such supplies from Russia. Indeed, this is not the objective of the European Union. So we switched to global market, LNG market. And this global LNG market, the thing about this market is that there are many other competitors on this market. There are many other customers, if you like. So we have effectively started competing for gas supplies from very few places around the world. So this makes us quite vulnerable. And of course, on top of that, there is an ongoing conflict in the Middle East, which may have wider ramifications on availability of the supplies. When it comes to oil, the situation is slightly better, but we still, in this part of the world, particularly in Eastern Europe, we are very much dependent on supplies of oil, and this may require some very difficult decisions. And in my view, one of the decisions that could be made, particularly in countries like Poland, is essentially to intensify efforts to extract oil and gas from conventional reserves that this country possesses. Because the main concern at the moment, and this is what the EU is spelling out, is the price and the security of supply at the moment. So we have pretty much made a full circle over the past few decades, coming back to the bottom line. The bottom line is affordability, and the bottom line is security of supply.
Belgium and the Netherlands, this was highlighted at this summit on Tuesday, have been importing much more from Russia recently, and this is getting in the way of this 14th sanction package. There are loopholes that are getting in the way, of the efficacy of this. Can you tell us about what you think is the way forward?
I mean, the economic sanctions have always been difficult to be enforced. We know that historically, if you look back to the sanctions imposed on the Iraqi regime, for instance, in the past, it's very difficult, particularly in the presence of expanding so-called shadow fleet of tankers that Russia is deploying. We have ever-growing number of tankers, which essentially supply customers. We have indeed seen a lot of interesting developments in the markets, in particular circumvention of those sanctions by deliveries to third countries. And of course, you mentioned Turkey, which is one of them. India is another example, but also in the European Union, the context of liquefied natural gas, we have seen increase of LNG imports from Russia. This, of course, is likely to continue as long as there is one stance of the EU. But we know historically that there is no such thing as one unified EU energy policy. We have a combination of policies across the countries. Every country in the EU is very different when it comes to production, consumption. So it's very difficult to come together and decide on a common stance. What we feel as imminent threats in this part of Europe, in Warsaw, for instance, is felt very differently from the perspective of, let's say, Madrid or Lisbon.
There's obviously a lot of emphasis to move forward nonetheless and deal with these issues that are so pertinent. And the tracking system was something that came up on Tuesday. I wondered whether you could share your thoughts about how effective this might be as a measure.
I don't have any intelligence on that, so I cannot give you any specific information. But from what I know from open sources, but also people from the industry who talk behind the scenes about this, is that a lot of the oil that is delivered, in particular, because oil is a very easy commodity, fairly easy commodity to transship. There is a growing percentage of supplies that it goes unrecorded. So, tracking devices might be useful, but as long as they are tracking all the trade. But as we know, there is increasing number of so-called shadow fleet, which supplies oil to various parts of the world, and this is essentially unaccounted for. So there will be no tracking devices on shadow fleet, if you like.
Indeed. Just very briefly, as we wrap up, the Gulf Cooperation Council and the EU summit, in many ways, a bit of a milestone, a breakthrough. Is this really just a diplomatic move mainly on the side of the EU? Do you expect any fruitful moves to emerge out of this in terms of the energy industry?
Well, I think that you put it very well. This is largely a diplomatic effort. This is largely to facilitate high stakeholder meetings. But is this going to sort of change the balance of power, if you like? I mean, to put it this way, probably not. Let's face it, we are at the crossroads in Europe when it comes to some very major decisions. And I think at the moment, in the aftermath of the pandemic, of the crisis in energy and security crisis in Eastern Europe, I think Europe should probably become more realistic about the options they have at their disposal and perhaps try and address affordability and security of supply, because these are going to be the most important issues going forward.
Okay, Dr. Sławomir Raszewski, thank you very much for joining us on The Bottom Line.
Thank you so much.
That was Dr. Sławomir Raszewski, Senior Lecturer at the University of East London. Thanks so much for joining us on Business Arena. I was your host, Marie Cato. Join us every weekday at 5 p.m. on TVP World. And for more regional business stories, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. Coming up next, World Talks. Goodbye.